Deciding to put up a fence around my backyard was not just a casual decision. It was a heartfelt commitment to ensuring the safety of my children and pets. As any parent or pet owner understands, the desire to create a secure environment is paramount. I envisioned a vibrant space where my kids could laugh and play freely, and my pets could roam without the constant worry of nearby traffic or unfriendly neighbors. The fence represented more than mere wood and nails. It symbolized peace of mind, a barrier against potential dangers and uncertainties that lurked beyond our property line. When I finally made that decision, it felt liberating. I could see the relief on my children's faces as they chased each other around the yard, their laughter ringing out like music in the evening air. My dog could now explore the expanse of grass without the fear of darting into the street. It was blissful, at least until the Homeowners Association, HOA, decided to intervene. The first notice I received from the HOA struck like a thunderclap, tearing apart the idyllic tranquility I had worked so hard to establish. They cited multiple violations of community guidelines, claiming that my newly erected fence was both unauthorized and unsightly. The tone of their letter was stern, threatening eviction, and demanding that I dismantle the fence within a week or face hefty fines and legal repercussions. My heart sank. What had started as a simple act of love for my family had suddenly turned into a battleground. In those initial moments of distress, I felt lost and overwhelmed. The HOA seemed to wield an almost tyrannical power over our community, dictating what could and could not exist within our own yards. My mind raced with thoughts of confrontation, yet I knew that backing down wouldn't solve anything. That's when I took a deep breath and reminded myself of one critical detail: the role I held as the head of the state zoning department. Armed with that knowledge, I began to realize that I wasn't just any homeowner. I had authority over property regulations in our area. Could it be that this very position could turn the tide? Instead of folding under pressure, I resolved to challenge their authority head-on. This was more than just about me. It was about every homeowner who might be facing similar intimidation tactics from an overreaching HOA. As I gathered my thoughts and outlined a plan, determination surged within me. I would not only defend my right to a safe and enjoyable space for my family, but also investigate their claims against me. Unbeknownst to them, my resolve would soon lead to uncovering deeper issues within the HOA, issues that would shake the foundations of their governance and bring their practices under scrutiny. The journey was just beginning, one that would transform conflict into a quest for accountability and justice in our community. Just as I began to find joy in my decision to build the fence, the tranquility of my newfound sanctuary was shattered by an official notification from the Homeowners Association. The letter arrived one afternoon as I was watching my children play outside, their laughter mingling with the rustling leaves. At first it looked like any other piece of mail, but as I opened it and read the contents, my heart dropped. The HOA had cited multiple violations of community guidelines. Their accusations ranged from claims that my fence was unauthorized and unsightly to stating that its height exceeded the established limits for our community. I could hardly believe what I was reading. The letter went on to outline that if I did not dismantle the fence within a week, I would face significant fines and potential legal action. The words eviction and legal repercussions jumped off the page, sending waves of anxiety coursing through me. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. My intentions had been purely protective, motivated by love for my family. How could they misconstrue that into something worthy of punishment? As I read the starkly worded ultimatum again, I imagined how much effort I had put into this project, not just physically, but emotionally. It felt like someone had taken my vision for a safe haven and turned it into an attack against me. In those moments, I experienced a cocktail of emotions: anger at the HOA's overreach, confusion over their interpretation of the guidelines, and despair at the thought of having to dismantle the very symbol of safety I'd erected for my loved ones. How could a community organization, appointed to protect us, instead behave like a domineering entity wielding threats? As I contemplated my next steps, it struck me that I wasn't alone in this predicament. My neighborhood was filled with families who likely felt equally constrained by the bylaws imposed by this power-hungry HOA. This realization lit a fire within me. I could not let fear dictate my family's future or set a precedent that silenced us all. I decided it was time to confront this unwarranted demand head-on. Equipped with the knowledge of my position in the state zoning department, I began to collect relevant documentation and research our community guidelines thoroughly. Information started to pool in my mind: regulations regarding property lines, fencing codes, and permissible installations. But before taking any bold steps, I needed clarity. Were these accusations legitimate? Perhaps now was an opportunity not only to protect my fence, but also to understand how many others had been impacted by an HOA that seemed willing to impose harsh penalties without rightful cause. Thus began my quest for answers, one that promised to uncover not only my truth, but possibly unravel practices long overlooked in our tight-knit community. It wasn't just about fighting back. It was about ensuring fairness and justice for every homeowner who dared to pursue their vision for a safe and happy home. The shock of receiving that ultimatum from the HOA reverberated through my mind long after I read their letter. It was incomprehensible to me that a protective measure, one driven by love and concern for my family, could be met with such hostility. The notion that I could be penalized for wanting to create a safe haven for my children and pets felt like an absurd twist of fate. In an instant, the fence that symbolized security morphed into a source of conflict and anxiety. As the days passed, the emotional toll became palpable. I found myself wrestling with anger and confusion. How could a community organization, designed to foster harmony among neighbors, act as judge and jury over my modest attempt to fortify my home? The feelings of betrayal deepened as I realized that this was not just about me. It was about the principles of fairness and respect within our neighborhood. I began to notice subtle changes in my interactions with neighbors. The very people who once shared smiles or friendly chatter during weekend barbecues now seemed hesitant in their greetings. Did they view me as a troublemaker, or were they afraid that aligning themselves with me might draw the ire of the HOA? Each awkward exchange brought new waves of isolation, compounding my stress. It felt lonely standing up against an established authority that wielded power over many residents like an iron fist. In moments of quiet reflection, I questioned whether I was making the right decision by resisting the HOA's demands. Was I inviting further conflict into our lives? The fear of retaliation from the association lingered at the back of my mind, amplifying every doubt about my course of action. Yet each time I watched my children play safely within our enclosed yard or saw my dog basking in the sun without worry, my resolve cemented itself further. Those innocent moments made it clear. I had to stand firm in what I believed was right. However, it wasn't just about personal stakes anymore. It became evident that other homeowners must be feeling similarly oppressed by the HOA's regulations and behavior. Perhaps they too had faced unjust reprimands or threats for seemingly innocuous decisions meant to enhance their living spaces. This thought ignited a newfound determination within me. Not only did I want to defend my fence, but I also wanted to advocate for fairness across our community. I resolved then to harness my position as the head of the state zoning department, not merely as a tool to protect myself, but as a means to empower others facing similar strife. The journey ahead would not only involve examining whether the HOA's accusations held any merit, but also uncover systemic issues plaguing our neighborhood governance. With every passing day, clarity emerged amidst the emotional turmoil. This fight extended beyond backyard boundaries. It was about reclaiming a sense of community and ensuring that each homeowner felt valued and respected in their choices. The journey ahead promised challenges, but it also held the potential for collective empowerment, an opportunity for us all to stand united against unjust practices in pursuit of our shared vision for a safe and happy home environment. As I continued to process the HOA's threats, a crucial realization dawned on me. I was not just any homeowner caught in their crosshairs. I was the head of the state zoning department. This position provided me with extensive authority over property regulations in our area, and it suddenly felt like a lifeline in a sea of turmoil. I had spent years navigating the intricacies of zoning laws and community guidelines, and now those very regulations could serve as both shield and sword in my confrontation with the HOA. Timing is everything. Just like knowing the law can turn the tide, subscribing now might be the smartest move you make today. Let's see how this HOA reacts when they realize who they're messing with. Back to the story. The power dynamics between us shifted dramatically at that moment. Here I was, someone who understood the legal frameworks that governed our community, standing up against an organization that had assumed an almost authoritarian role. While they wielded threats of eviction and fines, I possessed the knowledge and authority to expose their potentially illegal enforcement practices. The realization fueled a surge of determination within me. I would not back down or allow their intimidation to dictate my choices. I began to meticulously review the community guidelines that the HOA had cited in their ultimatum. With my background, I was well versed in legal jargon and regulatory nuances, skills that would prove invaluable as I untangled their claims. Each line of text transformed from dry legalese into strategic ammunition for my defense. As I delved deeper into the guidelines, it became increasingly clear that there were inconsistencies in their enforcement practices. They weren't applying rules uniformly across the neighborhood, a blatant violation of equity principles. Moreover, my role allowed me access to resources and contacts that could assist in uncovering any discrepancies within their governance structure. In my position, I had developed relationships with other regulatory bodies and local officials who could lend support or provide insight into HOA practices. This network became an essential tool as I prepared to confront the board. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. The emotional weight of fear began to dissipate as I focused on leveraging my knowledge for positive change, not only for myself, but for others who may have suffered under similar oppressive tactics from the HOA. Armed with insight into property rights and community regulations, I envisioned a collective movement, a chance for residents to be empowered rather than silenced. I began reaching out to neighbors discreetly, gauging their experiences with the HOA's enforcement actions. To my surprise, many expressed frustration about similar threats they had received for trivial violations or misunderstandings of guidelines. This shared sentiment sparked hope within me. Perhaps together we could challenge this authority that had become more concerned with control than community well-being. As I prepared to take action, I couldn't shake the feeling that this journey was about more than just reclaiming my fence. It was about restoring a sense of balance within our neighborhood. My position gave me not only authority but also responsibility to ensure every homeowner felt heard, respected, and protected against unjust practices. The road ahead promised challenges, both legal and personal, but now it also held the potential for transformation. By standing firm in my beliefs and using my expertise wisely, I hope to inspire others to join me in demanding accountability from those who had forgotten their true purpose, fostering a supportive community rather than instilling fear through arbitrary governance. As I stood at the intersection of authority and action, I knew that my professional background as the head of the state zoning department offered me a strategic advantage in my battle against the HOA. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more compelling than the last, as I began to formulate a plan to challenge their authority. With my expertise in zoning laws and community regulations, I had a unique opportunity to expose the HOA's potentially illegal practices and restore balance to our neighborhood. First, I dove deeper into the community guidelines they claimed I had violated. It was critical for me to dissect every rule and regulation pertinent to my fence and its installation. I meticulously documented their claims, cross-referencing them with both local ordinances and state laws. In this process, I discovered discrepancies that were not only troubling but indicative of broader issues within the HOA's enforcement practices. They were setting standards inconsistently, applying regulations selectively, and there was evidence that they had acted outside the bounds of their authority on multiple occasions. Equipped with this knowledge, I then considered the legal ramifications of their actions. The prospect of potential legal repercussions for the HOA was not just a distant thought, it became a cornerstone of my strategy. If I could demonstrate that their enforcement practices violated fair housing laws or regulations governing homeowner associations, I would have a powerful argument against them. Not only would this validate my position, but it could potentially halt their aggressive tactics against not just me but other homeowners as well. I also recognized the importance of gathering support from other residents who had faced similar intimidation. I set about reaching out to my neighbors to collect testimonies and evidence of the HOA's overreach. By documenting their experiences, whether it was unjust fines for minor violations or threats stemming from misunderstandings of the rules, I aimed to create a strong, united front. This collective voice would add weight to my claims and reinforce the notion that this fight was about our shared rights as homeowners. Moreover, I began drafting letters to key figures within the HOA, presenting my findings in a professional yet assertive manner. I made it clear that I was not merely an individual homeowner. I was someone who understood the law and intended to hold them accountable for their actions. Each letter outlined specific violations, referenced applicable regulations, and asserted that I expected a prompt response. This was not just an offensive mechanism, it was also an opportunity for negotiation. Perhaps we could resolve these issues amicably without escalating to confrontational measures. Yet I remained prepared for any eventuality. If they chose to dismiss my claims or persist in their aggressive stance, I would be ready to leverage my position further. potentially bringing in state oversight or regulatory bodies to evaluate their governance practices. My commitment extended beyond personal defense. It was about safeguarding the integrity of our community. In those early stages of strategizing, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. My role wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. It had evolved into ensuring that all homeowners felt empowered and respected in their choices. As I laid down each piece of this intricate strategy, I envisioned not just survival but a future where our neighborhood thrived under a fair and just framework, a community truly built by its residents for its residents. With my strategy set in motion, I turned my attention to a thorough investigation of the HOA's enforcement practices. It was essential to identify patterns of misconduct that could be leveraged not only to defend my position, but also to rally the community around a common cause. Armed with my knowledge of zoning laws and community guidelines, I began to methodically assess the HOA's actions against other homeowners. I started by reviewing public records and previous correspondence sent from the HOA to various residents. As I sifted through the documents, it quickly became clear that a troubling pattern emerged. Many homeowners had received similar ultimata or fines for seemingly innocuous infractions. Fines for the color of house paint, complaints about landscaping choices, and threats over minor fence height variations painted a picture of an organization more interested in control than community well-being. To gain a fuller understanding, I organized informal gatherings with neighbors, inviting them to share their experiences with the HOA. Each meeting revealed stories of intimidation and frustration. One neighbor recounted receiving a fine for having a flower bed that was deemed too tall, while another faced threats after installing solar panels, an energy-efficient upgrade that should have been encouraged rather than penalized. These shared grievances amplified the sense of collective injustice, igniting a fire within me to take action. As I compiled these testimonies, I noticed they followed a predictable trajectory. Residents often felt powerless against the HOA's authority, leading many to comply silently rather than risk further retaliation. This echoed my own experience. It was clear that fear had stifled open communication and fostered an atmosphere of distrust within our neighborhood. My role as the head of the state zoning department now positioned me not just as a defender, but as an advocate for transparency. To further substantiate my findings, I reached out to other local officials and regulatory bodies that oversaw homeowner associations. Through these channels, I obtained insights into best practices and enforcement standards commonly upheld by HOA governance. It became evident that the HOA's tactics diverged significantly from these norms, raising serious questions about their compliance with state regulations. Equipped with this wealth of information, I drafted a comprehensive report detailing the HOA's patterns of misconduct. This document not only highlighted specific violations affecting numerous homeowners, but also referenced established laws regarding fair housing and community governance. I included recommendations for reform to foster a more equitable atmosphere within our neighborhood. Simultaneously, I recognized the necessity of presenting this information directly to the HOA board. I scheduled a formal meeting where I would outline my findings and expectations moving forward. My intent was not merely to confront them, but to initiate dialogue aimed at fostering a more constructive relationship between homeowners and the association. As the date of the meeting approached, I felt a renewed sense of purpose coursing through me. This wasn't just about reclaiming my backyard, it was about restoring dignity and respect within our community. By shining a light on the HOA's dubious practices and rallying the voices of my neighbors, I was determined to effect change, transforming an oppressive climate into one characterized by fairness, collaboration, and mutual respect among all residents. As I prepared for what lay ahead, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about the possibilities for our neighborhood's future. With the groundwork laid for challenging the HOA, I shifted my focus to building a robust case against their practices. Documenting evidence of their illegal actions would be crucial not only for my defense, but also in rallying support from fellow homeowners who had experienced similar intimidation. I knew that presenting a united front could amplify our voices and increase the chances of effecting meaningful change. I began by meticulously organizing all the documentation I had gathered: letters from the HOA, testimonies from neighbors, and records of fines and complaints. Each document served as a piece of the puzzle, illustrating a troubling pattern. I created a spreadsheet to track specific violations cited against residents, noting the dates, details of incidents, and how they aligned with our community guidelines, or often how they did not. This meticulous organization would make it easier to present my case clearly and compellingly. Next, I hosted a series of gatherings in my backyard. My intentions were simple: bring neighbors together in a comfortable environment where they could share their experiences without fear. As we discussed our grievances, stories flowed freely. Residents who had kept silent for too long began to speak up about fines for trivial issues like garden decor or patio furniture aesthetics. An elderly couple recounted being threatened with legal action after installing a new fence for privacy, while another neighbor shared how he was penalized for having a boat parked in his driveway despite it being within the confines of HOA regulations. These discussions not only fostered camaraderie among those affected, but also highlighted the broader implications of the HOA's behavior on our community spirit. It became evident that the fear instilled by the HOA had silenced many, but now there was an emerging sense of empowerment among those who had been wronged. I encouraged attendees to document their experiences formally and provide statements for our collective effort. With each new account, our case grew stronger. Recognizing that we were not just isolated individuals being targeted, but rather part of a systemic issue brought newfound energy to our movement. We were more than just angry homeowners, we were advocates for fairness and accountability. Armed with this mounting evidence, I prepared to draft a comprehensive letter addressing the HOA board. This letter would not only outline individual complaints, but also illustrate the community's overwhelming dissatisfaction with their governance tactics. I made sure to reference relevant laws and fair housing regulations that supported our claims, emphasizing that we expected accountability and change. Additionally, I reached out to local media outlets to discuss our situation, understanding that raising public awareness could put further pressure on the HOA to act responsibly. I believed that shining a light on their misconduct would help protect other homeowners from suffering similar indignities in silence. The process was not without its challenges. Some residents remained hesitant to speak out due to fear of retaliation or skepticism about our chances of success. However, through persistence and consistent communication, I encouraged them by sharing previous victories for homeowners against similar associations in other neighborhoods. Each small victory withheld the potential for larger changes. It was about restoring balance to our community. As I meticulously crafted our case against the HOA, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just for myself, but for each individual who longed to reclaim their rights as homeowners. We stood on the brink of transformation, ready to confront an authority that had wielded its power oppressively for far too long. Together, we were prepared to demand respect and equity in our community once again. The day of the confrontation with the HOA board loomed large on my calendar, a culmination of weeks spent gathering evidence, rallying support, and formulating our unified stance. I felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration as I walked into the community center where the meeting would take place, flanked by my neighbors who shared my resolve. It was time to shift the power dynamics that had long favored the HOA and expose their vulnerabilities. Before entering the room, I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the purpose behind our gathering. Each neighbor present had faced intimidation or unfair treatment at the hands of the HOA, and together we were no longer passive victims. We were advocates for justice and accountability. This was our moment to reclaim our voice. As the board members settled into their seats, I could sense a shift in the atmosphere. The usual air of authority they carried seemed less imposing now that they were being scrutinized by a well-informed group of residents. I began by outlining our collective grievances, referencing specific incidents involving unfair fines and ambiguous interpretations of community guidelines. With each point I made, I could see doubt creeping into their expressions, a flicker of unease at being held accountable. To support my claims, I presented the comprehensive report I had prepared, meticulously documenting not just my own experiences, but also those of countless other homeowners. With charts detailing the patterns of misconduct and recordings of our informal gatherings, it was clear that we were a united front prepared to demand change. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as I highlighted specific instances where their actions violated established laws and regulations. As I continued, I saw members attempting to regain control of the conversation, pushing back with pointed questions and defensive remarks. However, I was prepared for this moment. Backtracked on their claims or tried to diminish our concerns only solidified our resolve. The angry yet measured rebuttals from my neighbors transformed what could have been a one-sided discussion into an engaging discussion where they could no longer dismiss our fears as unfounded. One board member's snide remark about keeping up appearances struck a particularly raw nerve. It prompted several attendees to voice their discontent about how the HOA's enforcement practices had resulted in an atmosphere of fear where creativity and personal expression were stifled. Her comment showcased how disconnected the board was from the true sentiments and needs of the neighborhood, an insight that had apparently gone unnoticed until now. With each passing minute, it became evident that power was shifting in our favor. No longer were we just homeowners. We had become a formidable collective united by discontent against unfair governance practices. Their authority began to look fragile, threatened by a group who refused to back down and allow self-serving policies to dictate our living environment. Finally, I concluded with a call to action. We expected not only immediate rectification of the instances we had discussed, but also reforms that would usher in a more transparent and equitable governing structure within the HOA. We demanded regular community meetings where concerns could be aired openly without fear of retaliation, a move towards rebuilding trust rather than maintaining control through intimidation. As we left that meeting, there was an undeniable sense of camaraderie among us. We had confronted an authority that had long seemed unassailable, showcasing not only our collective experiences, but also our unity in seeking change. This confrontation marked a turning point not just for me or my fence, but for all homeowners who longed to reclaim their neighborhood from an oppressive governance structure. Empowered and resolute, we stepped into an uncertain future with newfound hope for a thriving community built on respect, fairness, and collaboration. In the aftermath of our successful confrontation with the HOA board, I shifted my attention to reversing the eviction notice that had been levied against me. The oppressive threat of having to dismantle the fence, a decision rooted in my commitment to my family's safety, felt like a dark cloud looming over my home. But empowered by our recent victory and bolstered by the support of my neighbors, I was resolute in my determination to challenge this unjust action. Drawing upon my position as the head of the state zoning department, I began strategizing practical legal maneuvers designed to negate the eviction notice. The first step was to file a formal appeal against the HOA's decision. I meticulously drafted the appeal, detailing the grounds on which I believed their actions were unfounded. My argument rested heavily on both the information presented during our recent meeting and a careful analysis of the community guidelines themselves. I outlined how their actions were not only poor governance, but also constituted an overreach of their authority. In parallel with my appeal, I consulted with legal experts familiar with HOA regulations and property law. Their insights proved invaluable, reinforcing my position and illuminating additional avenues for recourse that I had not initially considered. Together, we assessed potential violations committed by the HOA in their enforcement process, including discrepancies in how fines were applied to different homeowners. This further solidified the case I was building against them. Once my appeal was filed, I made sure to inform my fellow homeowners about the developments. Transparency was key. Everyone invested in reversing my eviction needed to feel included in the process. With their collective concerns backing me, I sent out a letter to the HOA reiterating not just my intent to appeal, but also reminding them of our grievances. A unified front that would no longer be easily dismissed. The pressure began to mount on the HOA as news of my appeal spread through our community. No longer was this a solitary battle over a fence. It was now a challenge to their entire operation. The feedback from neighbors continued to pour in, with many expressing solidarity and even offering to support me with additional documentation or testimonies about their own experiences. Each new story fortified our case and added weight to the arguments we were putting forth. In response, it became clear that the HOA board felt threatened by this newfound momentum among residents. They attempted damage control by inviting me to a private meeting, seeking to negotiate or dissuade me from pursuing my appeal further. I recognized this as an opportunity not only to reverse my eviction, but also potentially initiate larger reforms within their policies, bringing accountability to light. With legal counsel at my side, I decided to accept their invitation, but remained intentional about showcasing not only our grievances, but also our demands for a transparent process moving forward. This was a chance for them to understand that we would no longer accept intimidation tactics or unilateral decisions regarding our homes. As we prepared for this pivotal meeting, I could sense a change in dynamics. The HOA that had once seemed unassailable now appeared vulnerable and on the defensive. The weight of our united voices and shared experiences had shifted the field. They were now forced to reckon with their practices in a way they had never anticipated. This confrontation was not just about reversing an eviction. It represented taking back control over our community governance and ensuring no resident would have to endure similar pressures going forward. With each step taken, I moved closer not only toward reclaiming my fence, but also toward a future where accountability and fairness were cornerstones of our community, values we all deserved. As the dust settled from our confrontation with the HOA board, the repercussions of our actions began to unfold in significant ways. The pressure we had placed on the board was palpable, and it wasn't long before the HOA found itself facing an unexpected audit initiated by state regulatory authorities. My position as the head of the state zoning department meant that I could request an examination of their practices, and I did just that, fully aware that this would expose systemic issues within their management. The audit focused on the HOA's enforcement practices, specifically their selective application of rules and regulations that had severely impacted homeowners across the community. This examination brought to light numerous discrepancies, fines issued without adequate justification, inconsistent interpretations of community guidelines, and a pattern of intimidation used against residents who dared to question their authority. What we had suspected all along was now being validated through a formal investigation. News of the audit sent shockwaves through the HOA. What had once seemed an impermeable fortress of authority was now revealing its vulnerabilities. Board members who had previously dismissed our concerns with contempt were suddenly scrambling to justify their policies and decisions. Internal meetings became fraught with tension as they attempted to devise a strategy to mitigate the fallout from the audit. In tandem with this external pressure, I continued to engage with my fellow homeowners. They needed to feel supported during this tumultuous time, as many were understandably anxious about potential repercussions from the HOA. I organized community meetings not only to keep everyone informed, but also to strengthen our resolve. Sense of unity among residents grew stronger. We were no longer just individuals facing intimidation, but a cohesive group demanding accountability. As the audit progressed, I learned that it was uncovering more than just procedural discrepancies. It was exposing deeply ingrained flaws in how the HOA operated. The findings would likely lead to recommendations for systemic reform, changes in governance that would require greater transparency and fairer enforcement practices moving forward. This prospect excited many residents who had felt powerless for far too long. With each new report coming from the auditors, confidence surged within our ranks. We understood that this could be a turning point, a chance not only to reclaim my fence and reverse unjust fines, but also to reshape how our community was governed. Our fight was no longer about merely resisting oppressive tactics. It was about establishing a framework for fair and respectful governance that prioritized homeowner rights and community engagement. When the audit's preliminary findings were finally released, they confirmed what we had fought for all along. The HOA's failure to adhere to fair housing laws and its inconsistent enforcement practices were undeniable. This solidified our case against them, further bolstering our demands for reform. Ultimately, as we prepared for what was to come next, a series of discussions about how to implement changes highlighted by the audit, I felt a profound sense of hope. The battle had taken unexpected turns, vulnerabilities had been exposed, and it was becoming evident that positive change was not only possible but inevitable. Together with my neighbors, we were not just taking back control over our homes. We were paving the way for a future where fairness and accountability were enshrined in our community values. The HOA's grip on our neighborhood was loosening, and with our collective determination, we would ensure that never again would homeowners feel powerless under such authority. Reflecting on the events that unfolded, it became clear that our struggle against the HOA was about far more than just my fence. It touched upon essential principles of community governance and homeowner rights. The repercussions we faced highlighted a deeply ingrained need for accountability within organizations that wield significant power over citizens' everyday lives. Our confrontation and the subsequent audit of the HOA were emblematic of the broader issues that often plague homeowner associations, such as the unbridled use of authority and selective enforcement of rules. As we gathered testimonies and documented evidence, I saw how easily fear can silence individuals. Many homeowners had initially felt powerless, allowing their rights to be trampled by an authority that should exist to serve them. Our united front not only created momentum for change, but also ignited conversations about transparency and fairness in governance that had been long overdue. There were stark realizations about how key governance structures remained insulated from scrutiny, operating without checks and balances. The audit served as a catalyst, not just exposing the HOA's misconduct, but also raising awareness about the importance of holding local authorities accountable for their actions. When residents witness the reality of mismanagement firsthand, it creates a ripple effect, encouraging them to question and engage rather than accept unjust practices as the status quo. In this regard, the experience charted a path toward empowerment among homeowners. Instead of fearing retaliation from an imposing HOA, we learned how our collective voices could challenge authority effectively. Moreover, this incident illustrated a critical lesson regarding community engagement. Residents must actively participate in shaping the policies that govern their lives. Homeowners associations should not be immune to public scrutiny, nor should their decisions remain unchallenged. We confronted a common myth that HOA governance is inherently just simply because it is local. The reality we uncovered painted a different picture, one of inconsistent applications of rules and a lack of responsiveness to the community's needs. Through our actions, we catalyzed discussions on creating structured channels for transparency where grievances could be expressed freely and solutions could be forged collaboratively. Collective decision-making became synonymous with accountability, ensuring that no single body could overreach without consequences from those they served. Perhaps one of the most significant aspects of our battle was emphasizing that accountability doesn't just protect individual homeowners. It enhances community cohesion and fosters trust among residents. When actions are transparent and decisions are made collectively, communities thrive on open dialogue rather than fear-based compliance. Looking ahead, I envision pathways through which other homeowners could voice their concerns without apprehension. Change is tangible when people feel secure in their rights as residents, and through our shared experience, we had laid the groundwork for fostering a culture where respect for community governance would cement itself as standard practice rather than an exception. Ultimately, this journey illustrated how a singular act of resistance against wrongful eviction sparked systemic reflection that could lead to positive transformations in community governance. The struggle fostered solidarity among neighbors and allowed us to reclaim not only our rights but also the integrity of our neighborhood. As we moved forward together, optimism flourished. We stood determined to ensure that accountability would remain at the forefront of how our community was managed, ensuring fairness for all who called this place home. As I reflect on the journey we undertook to challenge the HOA, I find that it has not only transformed my personal circumstances, but also reshaped my understanding of community and governance. This experience initiated a profound personal growth, an evolution from feeling like a victim facing overwhelming odds to becoming an advocate for justice and change within my neighborhood. I learned that the struggle for one's rights can often inspire collective action, galvanizing others who feel similarly disempowered. The act of building my fence began as a simple decision rooted in the safety of my family, yet it sparked a movement that revitalized our community's spirit. It highlighted how essential it is for homeowners to be aware of their rights and empowered to speak up against unjust practices. No longer were we just passive recipients of rules imposed by an authority, we emerged as active participants in our governance. This journey underscored a valuable lesson. Accountability in leadership isn't just beneficial, it's vital for maintaining trust between residents and the organizations designed to serve them. As we faced the HOA together, I witnessed the strength that comes from unity. Our collective voice turned anxiety into momentum, leading us to challenge long-held beliefs about the responsibilities of homeowner associations. The audit uncovered systemic issues, underscoring a reality many residents had been forced to accept quietly out of fear. Now, with renewed transparency and accountability at the forefront, trust within our community began to strengthen, fostering a sense of collective ownership over our shared environment. Looking ahead, I aspire for our neighborhood relations to flourish based on principles of respect and collaboration. The relationships forged during this challenging time laid the groundwork for future dialogues centered around community values. We began establishing regular meetings where homeowners could voice concerns without fear, creating an open forum where grievances could be discussed constructively instead of being silenced beneath bureaucratic power structures. These aspirations extend beyond mere governance alterations. They embody a vision for a revitalized community spirit based on mutual respect and understanding. I hope that as residents engage more actively with one another and reclaim their roles in decision-making processes, we will foster a culture that encourages innovation and creativity rather than punitive compliance to arbitrary rules. I also recognize that our fight is part of a larger narrative, a movement advocating for homeowner rights across numerous communities facing similar challenges. Having emerged from this experience more informed and engaged than ever, I'm committed to championing broader reforms in homeowner association practices throughout our region. Ultimately, this journey has left me with optimism and determination. Together with my neighbors, we have taken significant strides toward changing how our community operates. And while this chapter may have involved confrontation and hardship, it has also reinforced the notion that through resilience and unity, positive change is possible. As we move forward, I'm excited to see how our renewed sense of purpose will continue shaping our neighborhood into one characterized by fairness, accountability, and vibrant community connections. An environment where every resident feels empowered not just as homeowners, but as valued stakeholders in our shared home.